Hello, good morning, and welcome to this Café Transatlántico. This is our coffee talk series to celebrate the cultural bridges that connect our two countries. And we're very pleased today to have two major cultural institutions with us, the Library of Congress and the National Library of Spain. I'm sure they have a lot of things to talk about in this strange year. To do that, we have Suzanne Schadl, who manages the Hispanic Division of the Library of Congress. She also serves the leadership team in general and internal collections at the Library of Congress. And Juan Luis Bueren, who is the Deputy Director of the National Library of Spain, and he's been working there since 2006. He has participated in the main projects developed by our National Library in recent years, the digitalization of its collections, the preservation of the web and digital content, the development of the semantic catalog, and many things. I'm very pleased to have them and to be with him because we're colleagues. I worked in the National Library as cultural director for years, so I'm very pleased to have this meeting and to have you here. Welcome, both.
Thank you for the invitation.
And okay, we can. I would start. I won't interrupt your talking, but I think that as we're finishing the year, this has been a so. We all talk about. We always say unprecedented times, but it has unluckily happened before. But maybe for us, for our generation, it's true that it's unprecedented times. No, so the first question would be, now that we're finishing the year, how if we could make like say how this year has been for both institutions, no? How has the situation affected your both institutions? Susan, if you want to start.
I'll take myself off mute. So we've all become very accustomed to taking ourselves off mute in order to speak to other people on our computer. That's one thing. I just wanted to start with a caveat. So in terms of speaking for the institution as a whole, I don't have the bird's eye view that our deputy librarian or our librarian have. So I can speak to a unit within a larger unit that is really responsible for making recommendations for the collection and for helping the US Congress and people anywhere find materials in our collection. So I want to make that comment, and hopefully in sharing some relevant examples from the Hispanic Division and some of our connections with other divisions across the Library of Congress, I can speak to the general effects of the year as it's been. So it's funny, we were in contact with you all in February, just before the pandemic hit, talking about what we might do as a collective to help strengthen our relationships and help people in both of our countries see the materials that we had. And we were in the process of working on something that would happen in April, and we all went home for several months. In our case, one of the things that came very alive within days of sending people home was the importance of engaging the public in an online manner. And one of the things that we had been involved in at that point was a collaboration with our law library and with something called the By the People campaign, which is a wonderful effort to engage the public in helping create some of the metadata for our collections. So the law library had digitized a collection of historical Spanish legal documents, most of them from the 18th century and 19th centuries. And we were set to have an on-site engagement with this electronic campaign when the pandemic hit and we sent people home. So very quickly, within a couple of days, we had to shift that to an online engagement with people to help instruct how to do this campaign and so forth. So that's just one very tangible example of how we've adjusted to a pandemic. But what I would say institutionally, at least from my perspective, I've seen doesn't change what we do, making recommendations for the collection, reaching out to build the collection, or reaching out to help people find materials in the collection. What has really changed is how we do it and how the infrastructure that enables us to do it has changed. So, you know, we had to adjust very quickly to getting people who are accustomed to work in a physical manner with patrons and with the public to do so in an electronic environment. And that is that's a very hefty lift for any organization, let alone an organization that has over 3,000 employees. So, you know, we're still working on that adjustments, and now we're in a hybrid. So, you know, we went home quickly, we started to come back slowly, we're still coming back slowly, and then working up to bringing the public in. So it's been a year of adjustments and a year of reflection, you know, with a camera and ourselves. And I think we've learned some really wonderful lessons in the process.
Oh, you've said many interesting and similar things that have occurred here in Spain. Well, I may comment some of the ideas you've already mentioned, but I just take one thing you've said, and that I think is very important, because right now we're having many conversations and many meetings around the world after the pandemic, libraries after the pandemic. And at least in case of national libraries or the National Library of Spain, I have been even arguing with our general director, because we are currently preparing our new strategic plan for the next years. And there's this idea that the pandemic has changed everything. And I really think that there may be some deep changes that I recognize I cannot see, and that I think no one really can see, because when you are part of something so big, you never know the future consequences of that. But what I can really see is that we, in the near future, we may just have to do what we've always been doing, and that what we have learned is that we have to focus on what we've been already working of digital strategy with new channels to communicate to the citizens, continue with the digitization of our collections, with the digital preservation and all this, maintaining also all what we did physically and with people inside the libraries. So I see this situation just as the confirmation that we have to run even more than we've been doing all these years. And in this sense, what the data shows us of these weeks or months since the pandemic started is that the digital library has been more consulted than ever. The projects we studied around our laboratory or the BNE lab, we have a crowdworking website, Comunidad BNE, where we have started many new projects, and some days we started one project one day and it finished the day after, because people at home was very engaged. And I think that's one idea you've mentioned, and I totally agree. So we have also a project for scholars and with digital content and all this. So I think that the conclusion is we were in the right path, and we need to continue with that. Obviously, there are some things we have learned and we need to adapt. You've also mentioned that we are now working from home. We have to have better protocols for that and all these kind of things. But I think national libraries have to preserve and give access to content and to be close to the citizens and to serve the researchers. So, and we were already in this way of doing this also digital. So this is just to begin. What I would say is my thoughts about this right now. Perhaps in 1 month, 2 months, or 6 or 1 year, I will see it differently. But this is what I see right now.
Yeah, it's true that what you were saying, we've all gone digital now, but I know that the National Library of Spain, for example, was a pioneer in that in Spain, because it did it like 20 years ago, at least, no? Started with this process really, or even more, no?
Well, we started, yeah, 20 years ago. It was something that we was starting even more to substitute microfilming, and thought to preserve the physical document more than just to give access to 1 million documents per year and all these things. But yes, we've been 20 years in this way, and 10 or 15 years with social networks and with digital libraries and all these. Yeah.
I would add to that. I think one of the things that's been so interesting.
So I wanted to ask both.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was saying just how is this digitalization process going on in both institutions? I know that it started a lot before, and as Jose Luis was saying, it's been accelerated by this. But how are your projects as far as digitalization in both institutions?
Jose Luis, do you want to start?
Susan.
Okay. Susan, yeah.
Go ahead,
well,
Susan.
In terms of digitalization, so as Jose Luis said, you know, there were already a number of projects in a queue, right? And the queues have continued, and people have made adjustments to those queues and so forth. One of the things that's very interesting for me to talk about, I think, because my staff has been more involved in that aspect, is just how much emphasis we're seeing in web archiving. So not digitizing physical materials that we already have, because that is a real trick when you have people working from home outside of the library, but really making recommendations and reaching out to people to try and document what's happening in real time has been very interesting. And our staff has been working with that in a couple of different partnerships or different collaborations in the library. So one of the things that's really interesting about this sort of historical 20th century push to digitize libraries and to make collection items more findable with online catalogs or with thoughtful metadata is that these catalogs are available, and as people are in their homes trying to find materials, we can learn a lot of things about, you know, what's on people's minds. And if you look at the search logs just in the catalog in March and April, you would see a lot of people searching in a library, right? Well, all of the public search tools are out there for COVID-19, and they're also looking historically at the influenza of 1918, right? Trying to make comparisons there, and that gives those of us who are thinking about how you build a collection, what are people going to look at 100 years from now when they're thinking about this, to think about other means of documenting what's happening currently. So it's been very interesting to see how digital library and sort of web archive has taken place. So if you do a simple search at the Library of Congress in the everything for COVID-19, and you look over on the left-hand side of the screen, you just see so many different kinds of things, web pages, you're going to see photographs, you're going to see, sorry, you're going to see, you know, government documents and so forth. And I think that's that is an interesting piece in this, is that we've really reached out to the public to help us with that. So my colleagues in the Prints and Photograph Division have asked people to document references to COVID-19 in their communities through photographs. And it's just such a wonderful campaign that really speaks to the dispersed experience across the United States. One of the challenges we have is that we are located in Washington, DC, and we represent all of the United States, which is a vast area to cover, with a lot of different people coming from very different experiences. And that kinds of effort to sort of take something like Flickr or take something like Instagram and ask people to participate in helping us document a current experience, I think is a really interesting shift for us to make it more institutionalized. And then in addition to that, just really going out as librarians and thinking about what we need to collect from the web and preserve in our, in our servers for the long term has been a really interesting piece of the digital environment, I guess I would say.
Oh, well, going back to the question, to the beginning of the question, well, as Susan said, really digitization is no longer perhaps the major challenge we have. As far as you said, Miguel, we've been years doing this, so technologically it's not anymore a difficult process. It's an expensive, or it costs some money, and in this sense, well, as you may know, in Europe there's going to be money from the European Union to try to help different countries to pass the economic crisis, and we are asking money to help us to digitize contents and processes in the library. So I hope we may be able to digitize more of our collections in the next future. But as Susan said, one important thing is also to what we can do with the web, and as we are also trying working in web archiving, and what can we do to make this content that we have more usable, reused by the citizens? How can people in Spain and around the world be aware that they can find collections that may interest them? Because I usually say that we may have anything. If you're interested in something, we have something about it. Because you like cartography, we have maps. You like history, we have books. You like art, we have art. We have almost, you like sports, we have sports. I mean, we have everything. But I'm afraid that still for many people, national libraries are very big institutions, very difficult to access them. And this is something we really feel it's a challenge. It is true that the pandemic has, and I don't like the word, but has helped us to this, because our digital community has been more active than ever. For example, one day in Twitter, we said that anyone could ask one view of their city, and we will find the city in our digital library. And for more than 2 or 3 days, we answer hundreds of people asking for a view of their city. And as I said before, with the crowd working projects and all this, I think it's important to make people aware of the collections we have, and to try and work. And we took this expression from the National Library of France that we were talking of, from the Restoration Plan, to work on the reappropriation of the cultural heritage by the people. I think it's important that people can know that we have it, and can feel that they can use it, and they can create a study or do whatever they want. And that is really a challenge for us because we are big institutions and we have the challenge to reach a very different kind of public. And this is for me the most challenging thing we have in relation with digitization. Digitization as a process, it's more or less, and simplifying a lot, an economic question than a technical issue or a big challenge. The digital preservation, it's another topic, but let's say what digitization is, it's just an internal process. And after these 20 years, it's no, I mean, people who deal daily with this will say that it's a very big effort to do that, but it's something we have under control. Our aim is to work on this idea of being near to our society, and particularly in this time. And this is something that I think that during the pandemic and even today, we are trying to do. Right now, we have even exhibitions open to the public. Obviously, if we don't have the same number of people coming to visit the exhibition because there are no tourists, there are no people almost from outside Madrid. But we also think that it is important that as far as the situation of the pandemic allows it, to try and show that things can still move with all the precautions needed, obviously, no? But and to give some kind of hope and, let's say, entertaining to our people here.
Susan, well, you said you mentioned both aspects of digitalization, no? The idea of making your collections that the people can see see what's that heritage, that cultural heritage that you have, but also something that has been obviously accelerated in these times, which is the production of digital contents, no? And that's you were saying about web archiving, but now in these months, all this cultural production in digital cultural production has been accelerated so much that I don't know if there are new ideas of how to cope with it, how to deal with all that quantity, you know, all these materials, that what I'm going to do with them, because and hopefully we will have soon some in-person cultural activities, as Jose Luis was saying. You already have exhibitions. I think that's the cultural activity that is easier to control with the pandemic, but and we will have in-person cultural activities sooner than later. But I think that there's something to stay, is the idea that all these digital activities that have been created and are in process now are going to increase. What are you planning to do with that, Susan?
Well, that is an excellent question.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we learn in librarianship is that everything we do is further complicated by the next innovation, because the one that was there previously doesn't go away. It's still there in our preservation, and then we move into something new. So in terms of planning, what are we going to do with it? You know, I'm thinking, as you ask the question, I'm just thinking about that idea that what we do, making recommendations for the collections and helping people find that material, and the tools that we use to do it have changed so much. Where will we go, you know, 2, 5, 10 years down the road with, you know, what we do have, what will work and what won't work? So in the Library of Congress, in terms of that sort of reference, working with the public, we've seen an incredible, and I'm looking at my computer here to try and get some of the data. You know, we've seen an incredible uptick in blogs. We've seen the uptick in things like Flickr. We've seen the uptick in those programs like By the People. in most cases, you know, in terms of the blogs and by the people, about a 30% increase over the course of this year. In terms of Flickr, 76% increase. And then in terms of YouTube, which is sort of what we have available to conduct our events, we've seen over 100% uptick in that. And, you know, just speaking from our own division's experience, September and October tend to be very busy engagement months for us because that's National Hispanic Heritage Month in the United States. And, you know, we moved that into a YouTube, you know, a video environment this year. And it had some really great effects. You know, I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier. You know, we saw within 24 hours of that release, something like 700 visitors. We would never have that kind of attention, right, during a regular year when we invite people into the Hispanic reading room for that kind of an event. So we're really forced to think, okay, how do we take this lesson and that success into the future, and also, you know, bring attention back to the physical space, because the physical space is a really important experience for those who have the opportunity to be there, or to the sort of physical objects that we can't digitize. You know, there are many materials that just simply aren't available for digitization because of fair copyright laws that protect their creators. So in terms of, you know, where we would take that in the future, I think one of the things that's very exciting to me is how do we blend what we can do in a physical environment and what we can do with the artifacts that we are able to physically preserve in the library and not share digitally because they are protected. How do we take that experience in the physical and the outreach that we can do in a video or an electronic environment and combine them in a meaningful way, so we are taking some part of that physical experience into a digital environment and some part of that digital experience into the physical environment. So one of the things that we've been working on in my division is precisely that, trying to create a conversation between the physical space and the materials that are in that physical space that we can't share out, and the facility of a digital environment to reach places that we can't reach in the physical space. And trying to figure out how in the physical space we can get people out through the digital, into the digital environment that we are communicating within, and vice versa. And that's I think one of the most interesting projects that we have ahead of us. You know, what kind of technology is available to us to do that. And my staff is doing really wonderful and interesting things with ArcGIS through the Story Maps platform to refer to materials and photographs in a physical space and sort of take people to collection items and other references that we can't make digital. So I think it's a huge challenge, right? How do we take what we've learned here and really build on it in the physical environment and what we know from the physical environment and build on that as well?
Well, Miguel was for some short periods of time, unfortunately, cultural director in the library, and he knows well that this is, yes, one of the most interesting and perhaps difficult questions to answer right now. This relationship between our digital image and the physical premises, building in in particular in Madrid, we are in a very beautiful 19th century building in the city center where all the tourists can come and all day. And yes, that's undoubtedly one thing that I think in the future we need to learn, and I think we will have to learn somehow under this test and error basis, because we need to prove some experiences and see whether they work or they don't work. Obviously, there are some collections that need to be consulted in the library premises, but even for the general public and all these, we have to think of what kind of activities can be done here, because, well, there is some symbolic point that I think that institutions like ours represent, and the documents we hold, they represent. Some time ago, right now I can't remember exactly when, we exhibited the manuscript of El Poema del Mio Cid, a 13th century copy of one of our most important poems for the Spanish people. And it could only be exhibited 2 weeks and in a very small room, so only 15 people at a time could be watching it. So we had 15 minutes or something like that. Well, the visits were full from the first day to the last day, and all the media talked about this. I mean, and after all, you can see this manuscript digitized, and you can see a facsimile of this manuscript in the museum any day you want to come to the library. Well, I think this shows, for example, that there are some symbolic questions that we need to learn about what we represent and what people expect from us. No? This is one thing, and I think that we may learn in the future better how to translate the physical into digital and what to do in the spaces, in the physical spaces we have. And this is even a more difficult question to answer, in my opinion, in other kind of libraries, because after all, as national libraries or almost national libraries, we preserve and we have this research idea, but sometimes I think, what kind of libraries will be public libraries in the future when almost all the information will be accessed in digital? Because accessing to information is perhaps in those cases not the main mission they have now, and they may shift into cultural institution more than libraries. So this is a very important question, I think, that we will have to answer in the next days. Going back to the question about web archiving and preserving digital content, well, if I may, I take 1 minute, because I think it's interesting, perhaps for some people who may not be familiar to legal deposit, to explain that for national libraries at the end of the 20th century, we were quite happy, because we have developed national laws that said everyone has to give 1 copy of what you print to the National Library, and we received it all. And if I keep what is published in Spain, France keeps what is published in France, and all, so no, we will have all the production, the intellectual, cultural production in the world. But internet changed this. And now one very important issue, because obviously we cannot preserve all internet. And one very important issue is what should be preserved. And I think Susan explained this very, very well. But this is really something very new to us, because in the physical world, we don't decide. We assume that as a national library, we have to preserve everything that the Spanish society produced. And now we don't have this possibility. We need to choose what is going to be preserved. Obviously, there are lots of technical issues in digital preservation. Some are easier because, well, blogs, web pages, but complex digital products are very difficult to preserve, and that is really something that should be addressed in the future because it's very, very complex. But even in what we are more or less sure that we can preserve, this, I think that conceptually, this is a very, very important difference. As institutions, we have to decide what is going to be preserved or not. And in this sense, I think Susan also pointed some questions that are very important, and it is the idea of asking collaboration and trying to have as many points of views as possible. In Spain, as we have a very decentralized country, we are doing this with the different regions, comunidades autónomas, and they can decide what they, from their point of view, needs to be preserved. We are also trying to count with other kind of institutions to help us not to lose anything important for the future. And we will surely need to do this better and better in the future, because obviously we cannot preserve everything, and this selection needs to be accurate, diverse, and well, it's a major question for the future. No? Obviously, the technical problems of digital preservation are also important, because there is already digital content unavailable. Surprisingly, in our personal life, many times when we want to preserve something, we just print it. And that's, I think, quite symbolic, because after all, digital information helped us to preserve physical objects, but it's also a new problem and also an expensive problem. And money is also something that as public managers, we always have to consider, because after all, if we invest in something, we are not investing in another thing. Although I want to be optimistic about solving technical questions, because I want to think that as a society, we need to learn how to preserve ourselves. And right now, the society is from time to time more and more digital. So I think we will find a solution to this problem. Perhaps some years later and with some loss of information, but well, we will do as much as possible.
Susan, yes, I was going to ask you about the something that you already mentioned, which is the transformation of libraries into cultural centers. It is true that it's a main difference between your both institutions and a neighborhood library, you know, as Jose Luis was saying, when everything is now accessible by internet, a neighborhood library clearly it's transforming itself into a cultural center, or it won't have a utility, no? But in both cases, you have, as it's also been mentioned, very important buildings that are maybe before thought as the people as only for scholars or researchers, no? And maybe this is a good side effect, at least one, from the pandemic, which is that people know that now also the national libraries are for them. They're not just for scholars. So maybe the new time next year, well, we're always thinking about the second semester of next year as when everything in person is going to happen. I don't know. I have so many plans just for our cultural center that we will be open every day with activities. No? But are you planning, and Susan, you were saying something interesting, we're doing this mixture between obviously what needs to be preserved and having not exhibited just there, and how to open that to the public, how to combine this digital and open activity to the openness of the library physically. How you foresee that?
Sure. I think it's interesting sort of when we talk about library as a cultural center, because hopefully people have seen libraries, or at least their local libraries, as cultural centers for a long, long time. And maybe our national libraries with their sort of, you know, this large, beautiful building, in our case on the hill, might seem like it's there for someone else and not for them. And hopefully, yes, parts of this pandemic have helped people see that. I think in both of our cases, we have tourists coming through and seeing things that are part of the library, but not the library as a whole. So I do find us talking about, you know, how do we sort of take the bits and pieces that help create a national library and make those interesting and presentable to the public. And I think for In terms of thinking about the public and culture and a cultural center, I think, you know, the most sort of obvious piece in that are people, right? And people are individual with their different experiences, and they produce, you know, creativity and information in different ways. So the big trick is really, how do we not just show or deliver or serve material of culture to people, but how do sort of people find themselves in that material? So what are we doing to help, I guess, expand the network, the professional network that we have within our institutions, out of our institutions, and draw in that collaboration from people in different places. So, you know, one of the things that, two things that we do in the Hispanic Division that I think are sort of models that help us see this. Of course, all of this involves more and more people and communication and the ability for those individuals to work with one another. For almost 80 years, the Hispanic Division has edited something called the Handbook of Latin American Studies, which is a way of taking the sort of research piece of our library and sharing it with researchers and instructors across the country and in other parts of the world, in a bibliographic publication and database that helps I guess make trends more available to people. So I like to think of it as a conversation between about 140 people and all of the materials that they would highlight that are coming not just from the US, but from all parts of the world where they're talking about Latin America in their research, and sort of talking about that research with one another. So there we have at least 140 people, right, engaged in this discussion. And it isn't, you know, it's a small portion of the population, but if we think of the networks that those people are extended to, there's a possibility for that to go even farther. And another piece that we have is just connecting the sort of physical book by way of literature with the voice of the writer through our Palabra archive, and trying to share that out. So in some ways, I think it's thinking about communication and thinking about people and how people communicate with one another, and opening what we do to share information to those communities that are creating the information or creating the pieces that we're sharing as part of our culture. And I guess it's strange because, you know, to talk about a big group of people sharing with one another in the context that we're experiencing right now is a little bit odd, but I think for libraries to be cultural centers, in addition to sort of being available to people, people want to find themselves in those collections, right? And the more we can help people document their experience and share that experience through our institutions, the more people will see that institution is about all of us.
Yeah, well, just to add some ideas, because I think we've already mentioned some of these questions. When I think about this topic of libraries as cultural centers, obviously libraries, I think, have been cultural centers for many, many years. But the concept of library was, I think, more or less clearly associated to the idea of a collection. And right now, when I'm not an expert in this, but I have the feeling that when I go to some or see or read new initiative in public libraries and all these kind of things, they are many times focused on activities, on some things, connecting people, these kind of things. And I think that is very, very important, and that the society needs to have this kind of institutions. But I wonder if we are not losing something if we lose institutions with information, or that if keeping the information is not necessary because you don't need to have this encyclopedia in your library, without a collection, even a digital collection for the users, for the community, because the need of a particular community is very difficult to determine in general. And I think public libraries can really produce, generate, and have collections, digital or physical, for their particular communities. Even we are, and I have done it, we are always talking about digitization, digital collection and all this, but I think we cannot forget, and Susan has mentioned it, there are many kind of people, many people who don't use these digital technologies, who don't like them, who just don't want to be part of that, or just, I mean, old and not so old people just prefer digital books, digital newspapers, all these kind of things. And we need to think of them. If you Google future of libraries, you will see some very modern library with all glass and all this. But for example, in Spain, the majority of the population is very old and live in rural areas. And this kind of future libraries don't appeal for them. So I think this is also something that also has to be put in the table to when we talk about this. And linking with what we've been talking about, I think that something that should be done, or our society should be very worried about, is that the digital world don't leave behind anyone. And digital teaching, learning, and all this, capacitación, we say right now, it's not my favorite word in Spanish, but this is very important, because if we are going to give digital information, digital content, digital collection, digital activities, digital cultural activities, we need people to be able to access that and to have an alternative in a non-digital way if they want to. It cannot be just digital, and I think, and so, well, just to, I just don't want to repeat what I've just said about the challenge of combining digital and physical activities, but just not to forget that the society is very wide and complex, and that we need to focus on all kinds of publics, and that we shouldn't, I think, as libraries, forget that we are the connection between people and information and collections. And these may have changed, but I think we should not forget that, and just have cultural activities with people teaching some others how to do robots or something like that. That is fantastic. And I do think that it is fantastic, but that is not information, that is not collection, that is not exactly knowledge. It's something a little bit different. And I assume that people may not agree with me.
I was just going to say, if there are books that sort of follow the history of the rowboat, it's a
yeah.
Well, one last question, because we're running out of time. We'll be here for hours, because I think it's very, very, very interesting to share the challenges of those of these institutions. Is how you foresee your future bilateral collaboration. In what fields you face the same challenges? You have not similar, but obviously collections that have some common interests. So how you foresee your future collaboration? What could be done that hasn't been done yet and should be done? Susan, if you want to start.
Sure. It's funny. I have a friend who is an art historian who says there hasn't been anything new since the Baroque. in some ways, some of what we think about for the future is always grounded in some of the things that we have done in the past as well. One interesting place for collaboration between us, from my perspective, and certainly sort of within the Library of Congress, is I moved to Washington, D.C. from the state of New Mexico, which has a very long history with Spain and with Mexico and with the United States. And oftentimes a lot of people don't know about that history. And we have really wonderful opportunities to, I guess, reveal history and contemporary, contemporary references to history and to current events in ways that help people see history in a more prismatic way. I came to libraries after teaching history for a while, and my first history job was as a Latin Americanist who would also teach American history. And I said, oh, that might be a benefit. I mean, I could really start with, teaching sort of all of the context for this Eastern coast of the United States. And we might see something a little bit more complex than the stereotypical view of US history. So I think we really have a great opportunity between us to dig into the physical resources that haven't been digitized and some that have been digitized in previous projects that we don't have the same access to at this point, to really sort of tell, I don't want to say sort of revise a history, but to look at the documents and to make those documents available to conversation that is inclusive of people in different places with different experiences, to really address them from multiple perspectives and engage in a conversation that is a little bit broader and more complex when it comes to our history. That's a very exciting opportunity that I think we have between us. And in a contemporary context, we have a great opportunity to look at the relationships that we have in a 21st century context, in a 20th century context, from the point of information that is produced around and in the interest of those relationships. And I do think, that is an important piece of information to preserve and to share.
I totally agree. I think that obviously sharing collections and helping to get them known and all, it's very, very important. But yes, I agree that we don't have to be afraid, I think, of exposing the documents to discussion, to different views, and to try and have not just one 21st century, but different perspectives based on documents, based on history. And so, because every society needs to create their view of the past. And I think we have the opportunity to help society to do this with the documents and with facts of what happened or what people said that happened. And I think in this sense, the possibility of doing this both ways of the Atlantic is very, very interesting. And their experience, in particular in this question, I think for us is very, very important, because obviously I think you have more knowledge on this question than even we do. So yes, this is, I think, the most interesting thing we can obtain of collaborating, obviously based on digitizing collections, creating an online portal with these documents and all these kind of thing. I think we should try to be able to generate this conversation around our common history and what the influence of both countries, or one country has in the other and the other one in the first one. Sorry for my English. It's not so easy to explain these kind of questions.
Well, thank you, Jose Luis. Thank you, Susan. I think it has been very interesting for our viewers, and we will edit this conversation, and so we'll show it afterwards to everyone who's interested. I think that's another good side effect of these new times, no? That people are able to watch these conversations and to listen to them before afterwards. They don't have to be present. So it's been a pleasure to have you both here. I hope, Jose Luis, to see you here in the States in person, that you can come to the States sooner.
I'd love to.
Very soon. And Susan, we'll keep collaborating with you. We've done it in the past, and we have this recent event with Eduardo Lago with your Palabra archive, which was a great opportunity to collaborate with you. Jose Luis, as you know, the Library of Congress has been awarded with the Bernardo de Galvez Award this year by La Fundación. So it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you, and we will keep doing that in the future. So thank you both. Have a very nice and safe Christmas, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Likewise, Miguel, thank you. And thank you, Jose Luis. It's been very
thank you, Susan. Nice to meet you.